No candles out.
Is it on?
Yeah, check.
I don't see a light on.
I know. Okay.
We got.
No. So I think it worked. Yeah, it's not reading it. It's
It probably will take us a second.
All right. Sure. Apologies. Yeah. Okay, I think we're good. All right. Sorry.
Good morning and welcome to the February 6th, 2025 Audit Committee. The time is 10:44. If anybody out in the public is viewing, we don't have video, but we do have vocals. So we apologize for not having the video. With that said, I ask our auditor to I'd like to call the meeting to order and do attendance, please.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Fisher. The only attendance vacancy we have is Dr. Thomas today. Otherwise, all other members are accounted for.
Okay, we'll go to item C, review and approve of meeting minutes from December 5th, 2024. Hopefully you all had an opportunity to review those minutes. If we did, a few minutes, but if not, let me have a motion to approve the minutes at December 5th, 2024.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor
Aye.
and opposed? Thank you. Next item on the agenda, item D, fiscal year 25 audit work plan standards and activity.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. So we'll begin with our FY25 audit work plan status on the topic of the periodic audit for HCD, or Housing and Community Development. You all should have gotten a copy, have one in front of you of that completed audit report. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our staff for their efforts, and I think they put together a good report. And I'd also like to thank the staff of HCD for their participation and assistance in completing this audit. And so to highlight real quickly the results of the audit, we do feel that HCD is operating from a good place at this moment in time. They've undergone some significant changes over the last few years in terms of personnel, but also overall operations and some of their workload. And so we were able to capture a lot of that in our report and provide some of that clarity. And ultimately, it led to 4 findings of significance that, upon review of both the department and management, there was one agreement and 3 partially agreed to those 4 findings and recommendations. So we would ask that if the committee feels comfortable today to move this along so that we can put this on the February and March cycle of the Mayor and Commission for acceptance. And I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have with regard to that.
So, I really appreciate the work that you've done as a committee. It's very comprehensive, and I think captures some of the challenges with this particular department. Some of the things that I was looking for in this, because they have such a large grant and contract management kind of was the specific internal controls on managing such large, amount of funds. And of course, you've got the changeover with the staff.
Yes.
Right. So, in particular, I'm trying to articulate this accurately. Is the internal control system that they have to making sure that, first of all, there's so much crossover between different grant authorities. There's so much crossover between internal funding, and then they allocate. Do they allocate all grants, or do they themselves also manage contracts?
So it's a great question, Ms. Higgins. And so that is something that was part of our audit, and we did include, some of the highlights. Obviously, we've seen more that just couldn't fit all into a report, but from an internal control standpoint, they don't manage all of the grants for the unified government. There are departments that separately have their own grants and do their own contracts related to those grants. But this department does overwhelmingly manage the majority of grants, including total dollars. What I would say is perhaps more than a lot of our departments, what we found is there are a number of internal controls that this department has to be familiar with at the federal level because of the federal grants, state level as well, and then our own local controls from a financial standpoint, but also departmental based internal controls. And so we were certainly impressed by some of our testing when we went to the department. We did random sample pulling of some of their grant files and contracts. I think we can all attest to the fact that every file that we randomly pulled was very impressive in terms of its organization, the documents that were in it, the order in which they were in. That really stood out because that's not the case, unfortunately, for all of our departments. Once a grant is accepted and then essentially distributed to a nonprofit, for example, HCD does manage the day-to-day administrative tasks of that grant. So as far as, receipts for a nonprofit has to turn in weekly or monthly receipts. Those all go to an assigned member of this department who uploads this stuff, puts it in the system before any money is then distributed based on those receipts. And as far as the contracts go, they manage the contracts, they do the RFPs, they help get the contract signed, but that is a joint effort between HCD and our finance department as well as our risk department. So there are a number of departments involved when it comes to the actual contracts, but they do sort of shepherd that process. Yes. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I did recognize in your report that they had 2 external, like compliance audits
Yes.
that I assume also look very carefully in the internal control management thing. So the risks with a lot of contracts, as you know, is the possibility, if you're looking for internal controls, it's the possibility of some gaps in the system or contract awarding and grant management. So from what you just said, they don't issue the grant money. They repay the expenses that are authorized under the grant to the nonprofits and the organizations that have the sub-grants.
Yeah,
So
I would
they
say
don't-
almost 90% of what they do is a reimbursement basis.
Right.
And so once they get the identified information, like whether that's receipts or performance metrics, things like that, they will in turn then release that of funding. It's not an all at once distribution either. There are only 1 or 2, I believe, grants that are advanced payment, and that is not necessarily by choice of the department. That was either a directive by the mayor and commission, or that was a stipulation of some federal or state guideline for that particular grant. But their preference by far and the best practice is reimbursement versus advance payment for
Right.
of reasons. Yes.
So the internal control basically on these contracts, our internal controls is the interdepartmental kind of internal.
Yes.
Right. So
Yes.
the management office and the financial office being part of kind of the triumvirate of executing the allocation of funds.
Yes, so I can tell you there is probably a 5-page document for each contract, having done them myself, with a checklist. And that contract doesn't move forward in the next step until it has been approved by a particular department and sometimes even secondary approval. So it will start out with the subject department whose contract it is. It will move on to risk management for review. It will move on to finance for review. Ultimately, the attorney's office has to review it, and then the manager's office doesn't sign it until all of that has been initialed by those departments. And then most of the time with our contracts, anything over $200,000, for example, then have to be approved by the mayor and commissioner. Sure. And so quite honestly, there are a number of internal controls, some of which I think I I would say they are all good controls. At times, though, they can be criticized for a lapse or a lag in time for contracts.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's what I'm probably gonna ask about.
Yeah, 'cause it takes forever
Correct.
for the nonprofit to get money. And that's the pet
And that's
peeve.
because the system is a little bit,
Yeah, again, they have a lot of, I don't want to be critical of any of our departments. Um, I'm under the impression that I still think we can simplify some things. And I understand what federal guidelines you have a certain guideline you have to do, but a nonprofit shouldn't have to wait sometime 6 months to get money.
and you're like, I think the information that you just shared about that
Yeah,
the checklist with the different departments, I can see that would be cumbersome time-wise, but are there any, best practices, 1 week, 2 week, I mean,
Yeah.
like, if you got that all through there, is that, I don't know if that comes up in the audit, but in terms of getting the money out and being responsible, do we have any expectations of the speed with which it goes through there? Or did anything come in this audit to show where it gets slowed down?
Yeah.
Yes. So I would say of our departments within the government that deal with contracts, this is one of the departments that is the most efficient, believe it or not, because of the fact that the entire staff does this every day, all day long, throughout the year. A lot of our departments do 1 or 2 contracts a year and have to relearn the process and aren't as familiar. But so with that, there are certain efficiencies I would agree. I think they're countywide. I don't think they're HCD specific efficiencies. I think this particular department has it down very well. The issue, though, I think, is that we discovered anyway, has to do with some of those other departments and some of the backlogs. So HCD, let's just say, for example, could come up with a contract, have it ready to go in a matter of weeks. When they ship it off, though, for a review by finance or a review by risk management, it's not just HCD's contracts that are sitting on those desks. It is the entire government's contracts, and so it gets hit with a backlog all of a sudden sometimes. There is also the back and forth that can occur. So, for example, HCD does its best to make sure that at the beginning of the process, the applicant has all of their material. Well, the reason we have all those other departments involved for internal control purposes is to double check that. Sometimes things are missed the first time around, and as it gets to, say, the risk management department, they'll say, well, wait a minute, we're missing a document here, or this document is inaccurate with what needs to be on it. We'll get that information to the applicant. It is then up to the applicant in their court to try and get it back to us. Sometimes there's a delay that can occur on that. So there's a number of points that a delay can occur. I didn't necessarily see too much with regard to the HCD staff per se, but Judy or Katie, did you want to add anything to those insights at all?
I think an internal document that, and they also have like a timeline that, like with receipts, it's up to be reimbursed, but they need to have it back, I think within a week. Like the receipt needs to be fully checked, and it's by one person, the person who's assigned to the grant, and then there's a secondary person that checks it, and then it's also checked by the director, and all that is normally done like within that like 2-week period by them, and then they are reimbursed for that. But speaking to the idea of internal controls too, they also have limits of a certain amount of funds that can be within the nonprofit's account at a time. It's nothing more than 1 to 2 months, or after, because to show they've been spending the money and actually using it. Anything else can't be dispersed as well as another, just to the internal controls talk. But they do have a process.
Well, this is the flip side of the, the flip side of the question is, okay, have enough internal controls and you have systems in place. And then if that system becomes so cumbersome, that it makes the system inefficient, but that's also an element of internal control. So if that creates an inefficiency, that's something that really should be looked at in order to make sure that it's satisfying the requirement without lowering the capability.
Absolutely. Now, the one thing I would say to you with that is some of the added internal control components, in particular for HCD grants, are above and beyond what other grants for the unified government would otherwise have to undergo because of the federal nature. There are guidelines by the feds that we have to then throw on top of our own processes to ensure that the federal guidelines are being met as well. I will say though that they do keep a master spreadsheet that we were able to observe that basically says for each grant where it is in the process as far as approval goes, how long it took to get to that particular step. And so if we were to go to them and say for this particular grant, this nonprofit is waiting on its approval, where are we in that process? They are able to tell us exactly where that contract sits at the moment, whose desk it's on and how long it's been sitting there.
I want to say that this is very helpful, concrete information, and the way the two of you are explaining it here. I'm gonna, sometimes you present these things to the committee and then no one asks any questions. I will ask a question about that, if only to get that out in the public and say, and because it ends up being like, oh, HCD's, they're the problem. And it sounds like there are ways that the manager's office and others could be there's data that they could be using to look at the process, the steps involved, the time where it gets stuck, without pointing out anyone in a public meeting, but to make that a more efficient system and also take some of the mystery off of what's going on with the grants.
Yes. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna actually move to another thing, which was the ARPA funds, which is mentioned in here about, and the staffing. And I just kept wondering if there was any, like those ARPA funds can be done, right? In 2 years, I'm sure there's more paperwork to do after that. But we've had a lot, how many of those American Rescue Plan ones where we got
$7 million that we got.
they have to be spent by, they had to be like contracted by last December and spent in 2 years. Right. But in terms of what's the number of contracts that they're working with that are ARPA funds out of?
Well, there's a number.
Out of that.
Right now, I believe, as of this past year anyway, at the moment of the audit, there were a total of 57 active contracts that the department was managing. A good number of them.
I think the majority
of them were ARPA related.
So in terms of staffing and such, and I can't think, I was just reading something about the recommendations of the grant. Did anything come up with the staffing and planning for it seems like the workload, things are gonna change or free up people to actually go after those grants.
Yeah, we have to grant rights, remember?
Right, but according to this thing, they're busy doing all the other stuff mostly, which is probably connected to the ARPA fund. So was there any discussion of how that will proceed? Because the number of staff in HCD has increased considerably in the last, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. And some of that's been in response to the COVID and ARPA funds and such.
Yes, so if you'll recall, and it is in the report, that there were really 4 positions tied directly to ARPA that were funded by ARPA funds. 2 of those essentially live in HCD. There was one assigned to people and belonging and another one to our budget and strategic analysis department. In time, I believe each of those respective departments are anticipated to absorb those positions into their own full-time general fund pots. And so, for example, that number then would be cut in half. HCD would essentially only keep the 2 that are assigned to it. The other 2 would remain in those other departments going forward. Once the ARPA contracts are essentially done, you're right. I think that would certainly free up some time and create some efficiency with other grants that the department is otherwise involved in. The thing that we need to keep in mind, and that HCD was good to point out to us even when we asked that very similar question, is ARPA funds still have a good number of years, not necessarily in terms of the cutoff to assign funding, but then you still have some time to spend it, and then there's also the tracking and the monitoring
Yeah.
thereafter. So there are a number of years yet before we're gonna actually
Right.
see ARPA disappear from our workload. Yes.
One thing that I want to bring up, and we talked about this, is also the insurance requirement. I didn't see anything specifically in there, but I know I probably gonna come up with our commission when we get this is, how we determine how much insurance we serve a nonprofit. For example, if they only get 25,000 from us, isn't necessary for them to have $1 million liability. So again, I think that's something that we need to maybe take a look at, maybe from a policy standpoint.
Sure.
Because then, what happens when I talk to nonprofits getting that little money, they use the money that we give them to pay for the insurance. So
Yeah.
we really got to be mindful. And I think Commissioner Hamby thought about what we might want to do. Again, I'm going down a rabbit hole a little bit. Is to look at the government actually for those type of disbursements that we're doing, that the government would be responsible for that insurance requirement. So asking the organization to do it again. That's another
Sure.
But again, not sure legally we can do that. Sure, but I know what Commissioner Hammond had looked at. He saw some other municipalities was doing it, but again, I don't want to go around about things. We do from insurance perspective. We need to take a look at how that impacts those nonprofits.
And I think that's a good point. What I would just say too, real quickly, is although we looked at the insurance aspect in terms of an overall process and internal control with respect to each CD, and there are, obviously there are a number of contracts that require that. I think there are federal and state standards for some of these grants that would impact some of the HCD insurance requirements. But otherwise, in the policy regarding insurance, as we apply it across the board to all of our grants and local government, that was a little bit of outside, obviously, the scope of this particular audit. But I think, yeah, it's a relevant question that is likely to come up and maybe worth study later on at some point. So. Yeah.
My input on that would just be very careful about reducing the requirements as it relates to insurance, because $1 million nowadays is standard. I mean, if they don't have $1 million liability coverage, I don't care if if you're laying asphalt roads or you're just picking up garbage every other weekend. I mean, $1 million is what everybody should have. So I would be very hesitant about cutting down on that. Them having that being excessive in their particular case, the cost of it, a lot of times that's because of something they're doing. It's not just use that makes sense.
Well, someone now, I get it if you're doing stuff with children.
Yeah.
From that perspective. But some of it may not, and most of our nonprofit, they are dealing with our young people in some capacity. And I get that because you don't want to have a case where a child get molested or something happen. Bam, yeah, we got a lawsuit. What's that to cover that piece? I get it, but I guess one thing I look at though sometimes from a housing type perspective, they ask the nonprofits to cover, but then when they have the contractors, they also have their insurance. So I guess there just needs to be a balance somewhere when we look at that stuff.
And I don't mean to play with this point, and I'm not just trying to be argumentative with this, but what I was referring to a minute ago when I said it's because of something they're doing, it's not necessarily because of the type of job they're doing. It's the coverage may be onerous because you have a horrible history of claims, or the person who's filing for this, because a lot of this gets tied back to credit. There's a credit issue. Well, it's my insurance is expensive. Yeah, it's expensive because of some bad decisions you made. That's why it's as much as it is. But I've just heard of situations, always some situations where municipalities got sucked into lawsuits. Look, the bottom line is even $1 million is going to work back. No, especially if you've got someone who's got hurt. And I can certainly see with a housing situation, I just would not mess with that. If anything, quite frankly, I would go the other way. and say you ought to have X amount of coverage and then an excess liability policy on top of this. This is non-negotiable. Because if something goes wrong, and eventually it will, it's gonna be our problem.
Yeah.
And just as a update for the group, so in the last year, Athens-Clarke County did make some changes to its insurance. One of the things that we did is we benchmarked our requirements off of what's required by the university and other state agencies, so we're in alignment. Another thing that we did is we changed the review process, so it's not quite as onerous, although it's probably still a little more onerous than I would hope. And then in HCD specifically, when I was there, we recognized that the insurance was expensive. And so we actually increased the minimum awards that were being recommended, because there's no point in giving somebody $15,000 if they're going to drop 8 on insurance. Also, from my time in HCD, I would just caution, despite the great work that many of these are doing, there are some, at times, ugly risks that rear their head. That insurance is a useful tool for us and a useful protection. And so, for example, we had one grant funded agency that had court actions for assaulting a participant and was found guilty. If that person chose to pursue legal action without the insurance, there's a chance that they could try to connect that back to us. There's other examples that are a little less common.
And I understand the owners is on the nonprofit. That piece I get it. And I know that like that. ACC Gov too. So I get all that. I think the thing is something that we may again somewhere down the road just take a look at how we what and to your point, what percentage of nonprofits that had to go to court based on we have given them money and that what has been over the years, and how has that impacted us and to our point. Maybe we don't check that requirement, stay where we are, we up it. But I like maybe I'm teeing this up because I know these questions are coming out of the commission meeting. So I think if there's some data there, and I'm not asking Andrew to pull anything, but there's some data there that may say, okay, over the last 10 years, with nonprofits that we have awarded, these things happen, court case or challenge heard or whatever. We can see it, so that's why we charge and they charge.
My advice would be to look at the largest sample size you can that's realistic. Either the state of Georgia, the Southeast.
Right. Because
and always keep in mind too, usually with those type cases, the incident number is very low.
right,
It's just that when it does occur, it's catastrophic.
it's like having house insurance. You go, I have to pay it every year, and hopefully I'll never use it, right?
But you may have one incident over a 10-year period, but that incident costs $6 million. Something along.
But on this, I have another question shifting again to the interdepartmental agency collaboration and coordination. I know some of these, well, I'm just gonna ask it, right? And so it brings up in here that about how, I'm on page 40.
Okay, thank you.
That HCD successfully works with planning department regarding the inclusionary zoning ordinance, policy and implementation, and this department was a key player in assisting with development of HCD's affordable housing investment strategy. So they actually, I'll have 2 questions there. One is, this is, what is their role? What are they doing now with the inclusionary zoning ordinance? Are they keeping track of the affordable housing units in, for example, I thought it might be the apartment complex out in Atlas, out on Lexington Road, or is that someone else? Are they actually doing any ones where they're responsible? And likewise, bringing up affordable housing investment strategy, are they the ones who, we put a lot of money into affordable housing in the last budget? Who's thinking about how to spend that money on a day-to-day basis? Sure. Is it someone with HCD, or is that not a, how's that working?
Sure. So I can start, and then I may defer to Manager Saunders for a little bit of clarification as well. But when it comes to the inclusionary housing, there are processes in place that we observed. There's an understanding even by ordinance that the planning department has these responsibilities, HCD then takes over and does these responsibilities. So it's not to say that no one was aware of that or that that's not occurring. I think it's in a place though of still infancy where we're not seeing a bunch of actual applications coming into where we've just perfected the process. It's still a learning curve, I think, and that's what we're trying to get to here is let's get ahead of the learning curve so that when those do come in, those applications, we are on our game and we are ready to go and there's no delay or issue with that. As far as the actual affordable housing funds that the commission, has designated for these purposes, my understanding is essentially that a lot of those, even budget-wise, have been put into HCD's budget, sometimes just as placeholders until another location or appropriate department is found. But I think perhaps Manager Saunders can sort of talk a little bit more about who will be in charge of those funds. I think a lot of it is at the direction of each project that the commission sort of approved.
Sure. And Gavin has put it very accurately that as it relates to the inclusionary zoning ordinance, it is in its infancy and there were some immediate growing pains. So for example, when I came in, the methodology that was in the ordinance that was put forward, that was, sourced from other communities with these ordinances, was not something that would be appealing to the development community. So for example, somebody who's developing a financial analysis of any project could not know with any certainty what rent they were allowed to charge for these units would be. And so we worked through that committee that included planning to streamline that and benchmark it to some national HUD-based documents. We also then looked at those roles and responsibilities. There's actually not any structurally built affordable housing that has resulted from this ordinance yet.
What about the,
Atlas predated it.
oh,
So Atlas was,
okay, so who's keeping track of the pre?
interestingly with Atlas,
Yes.
Atlas was a condition of approval established by the commission, and it specified that the Athens Land Trust was going to be the enforcement partner on those particular projects or that site. However, what you get to is actually a really important point, and it's something that HCD staff, I see them very wide-eyed about, which is eventually you're going to see housing being built as a result of this ordinance, and the investments were being made. And these commitments to affordability are somewhere between 20 years and indefinite. And so that requires not just them being built, but then annual management to make sure that our partners are meeting their commitments. And so that's being done at the moment through a partnership between their compliance division and their affordable housing division, because there's kind of unique components of both. We could reach a point if there is significant uptake of the ordinance where there may be a point where another staff member is justified, although we are nowhere near that right now because we have 0 units. As far as the investments that were made at the budget time, approximately $5 million, those are within the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund in our budget. And HCD is partnering with the manager's office on putting that infrastructure forward to deploy them. Each of those actions, whether it's the gap financing or the single family affordability, they all are very legally intricate because, again, we're essentially taking general fund dollars and putting them into housing incentives. And that requires a lot of documentation and process to remain consistent with Georgia law. And so even as much as this week, there was a call between HCD, the attorney's office, and some partners in Macon to understand how they've legally structured basically an external fund to be able to achieve these purposes. And so to simply answer your question, HCD is responsible for those investments. They're working on them, and it's probably at least another 6 to 12 months to fully get them to where they're ready to launch.
Another item that would be good to have some clear, succinct, summary of when we are, reached out to by public comment after public comment after public comment, saying, why aren't you doing anything with affordable housing? And then having colleagues as well say we're not doing anything. So it would I'd like to know what we are doing with that, money. Here's an aside thing. It'd be good to have a one pager where we've actually put all the money, what we've done. A good one. I'm big on one pagers these days
Yeah,
on anything we've done with affordable housing.
of course
It's
you
not-
have, because the Habitat will be all, have 5 houses completed by the end of the year. At least what I was told by, Spencer Fry, I have 5 houses completed.
From the Michael Street.
Yes,
Okay.
so those should come out the ground before the end of the year. Hey, EACD is working on 2 houses now. I'm not sure when they're gonna be completed. And that's part of the ARPA fund. And I say that for Michael Street and for
Right.
EACD, that was an ARPA fund that we gave them. So those, to your point, Carol, those things are happening. To me, it's just me. Probably not happening fast enough, but they are.
Right.
Well, one of the things I've asked staff to work on is actually an interactive map where any community member can go and see where the government has been involved in incentivizing or creating affordable housing in the community. That could be both home ownership and rental. And when you think about the scale that is identified in the affordable housing investment strategy, needing approximately 8,800 units of market demand for that today. That is not something that financially the county can achieve without the private sector. So for example, the Athens-Clarke that's being developed out on 29 by Kroger has a really significant level of affordability. The only financial money that the county has in that I'm aware of would actually be a water and sewer connection fee waiver. They've been able to leverage affordable housing financing to make that work.
Well, I just wanted to point you to page 12 of the audit, because we did try to, the reason for the more detailed history on this audit was just because this department has kind of gone through kind of different charges in its mission
Yes.
history. And so, well, we did pull the relevant parts of the inclusionary housing program that reference HCD. So this is what they have been by ordinance charged with as far as their portion of what they should do.
One more aside before we get this, since I have this manager's office draft here as well, that inclusionary zoning that was done pre the inclusionary zoning ordinance that was done with designating the Athens Land Trust. Is there anyone in the county who is the communication liaison with the Athens Land Trust to know what's going on in that area?
So we communicate with the land trust regularly and actually multiple people, but specifically our housing team communicates with their staff about housing.
I'm specifically
For Atlas, no, I don't think there is, because we're not a party to that agreement. So
That land trust in Atlas,
yeah,
well, we're party to it in that we created the ordinance that required it. So as an elected official who didn't vote for it, but who was part of the team that approved it, it's like
sure.
I mean, it seems like that would, there should be some public awareness. We allowed them to create more density there from our planning department because they were doing this. There has to, in terms of accountability, there has to be some way to know if they're actually fulfilling what they were allowed to do through our zoning and special.
Sure, and we can certainly advocate some need to engage with the land trust and get updates on that. It gets a little more ugly if Atlas was to not be fulfilling their commitments because it would be the land trust who would be the agency to hold them to that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I also want to clarify for anybody who's listening, watching, Atlas is actually by our own definition, not restricted to affordable housing, it's restricted to workforce
the
housing,
workforce has.
which is 120% of area median income. But still,
But still, there's that requirement, right?
and I remember when they first came online, they did reach out to us and actually solicited for any county staff that were interested, specifically around some of that workforce housing.
You mean what, to live there?
They were looking for, if government employees were eligible for AMI otherwise.
Teachers and police people.
people.
They're right, because they're right there. I remember.
I don't actually know if any chose to live there.
Anything else from you?
Two
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
regarding the audit itself. So, was there any analysis of the risk of not executing some of the funds that are in these grants, especially for ARPA, right? Because that one's still,
Yeah.
Is there any analysis of past not being able to execute grant funds because of whatever reasons, or potential for future not being able to execute funds in appropriate time or functions or whatever?
Sure. I mean, the analysis was at least limited to the timeline of expected execution, whether or not someone, was able to fulfill their end of the bargain and receive all the grants that they had applied for based on performance. We did not get into individual, projects and whether they were able to meet their. It was more internal to HCD's ability to be able to process all of those payments in a timely fashion and execute grants from start to finish on a timeline that was either established in-house or established by the federal grant itself. And we did not see any issues, at least in our analysis, with that ability to do that.
We did pass a policy that is to address this risk exactly, which I'm assuming HCD is responsible of following through, which might not be caught in this audit, which had to do with, if by this time you haven't spent this amount of money, then, and I remember there would be discussions with the grant recipient about why that's not the case, and if needed, the money could be pulled back. So there's a process for reallocating it to other projects that would be acceptable and spent by the December 2026 deadline.
That's what the ARPA, right? So there's no concern of that, right?
Yeah, so that our manager's office in HCD were thinking about that risk.
And there's actually an item proposed for the next agenda specifically about two partners that have not met the pace. However, the manager's office recommendation is to not make any changes because one of them is actively under construction, like we can see it happening. And so we're comfortable at this point that we're just notifying everybody that this is what's happening, but we still feel that we can achieve or complete those projects as planned.
Kind of to the point just about internal controls, I went to a monitoring session with one of their partner agencies for their doing historic preservation, and they were saying, like in the thing, HCD, the compliance division, their staff was letting them know that it looks like you're on track. They were double checking, and it turns out for some of the historic preservation, say a homeowner in the historic house in the district they wanted XYZ, but it didn't fall within what could be under ARPA funds, that they were telling, they were very communicating very well with the resident, like letting them know there was benchmarks, and they have benchmarks with the agency, and the agency knows what the people they are helping, at least from what I saw at they call it their monitoring, which is kind of like their audit of their partner agencies that they go through.
Right.
Year
That's
round.
nice.
Yeah.
The other question I had was there any analysis of the actual administrative costs by percentage for managing these funds? So this is something that's, kind of it's tough to do because it's very complicated how they get their funds and how they distribute their funds, but we should kind of have a feel for what it's costing to manage the level of funds that they manage, right? So the administrative costs for that.
Sure. So, I mean, and it's in our report, I believe, for a lot of the grants, CBG in particular, I believe, are capped at 20% of administrative costs. But that's in terms of some of those grant specific numbers. I mean, essentially, if you're looking at it from a whole in terms of the department's existence and the grant money aside that is eventually distributed into the community, they're left with a general fund of this amount, which is the majority of which is compensation.
For the
as-
people that are working there.
correct.
Right.
So I would say that, I mean, the vast majority, obviously, of their general funds are in operation of administrative tasks.
Right. So that analysis, quick analysis, of that would be just, do a percentage of what we're paying in a general fund for that department versus the amount of funds that they're managing or distributing.
That's correct. Yeah. But obviously within their general budget, there are some, supply things like that. But yeah, I mean, at the moment, right now, it's a significant number of funds that are distributed that they're managing at a low cost when you really think about it, because a lot of that is ARPA funds, $57 million as opposed to what their actual general fund is for administrative costs. That number will obviously change over time once the ARPA funds are, distributed and in. But I do anticipate as well that either other sources of grant funding will be found and administered over the next couple of years as ARPA goes away, or the department will be able to take on some of the tasks that aren't just grant administration that they're expected to deal with. Like, for example, what the discussion was earlier, tracking affordable housing and other things like that. So, yes.
I think they probably get with the changeover that they've had in leadership, the challenges they've had for years, and the staffing going down and then up and then eventually down again. Seems to me they've done a pretty good job.
Yes.
From a cost analysis point of view. It'd be nice to give them a thumbs up. Oh, yeah, there's a way to do that. Yeah.
So, this fiscal year, the total general fund budget for HCD was approved at 3.35 million. Of that, approximately 1,924,000 was dedicated to personal services, so salaries and benefits. That is because that big balance is there's the Neighborhood Leaders Program, Community Partnerships Program are both two very large expenses that HCD manages. And then there's other places. So for example, the work they do with the COC and homelessness, the point in time count, and then securing those funds from the federal level, they get a 15% administrative management component, but that is not enough to actually fund the humans. And so that's where the general fund comes in and supplements. But we could probably pull together a sources and uses kind of graphic if y'all like.
So just to be clear, so the balance of those funds would be what would be used to actually build housing units?
No, well, most of the general fund money is not used in housing, in their operating budget is not used for housing.
Okay.
That's where we talked about that kind of allocation that the commission made. They also use, more recently, a significant amount of ARPA was put into housing.
It looked like the total budget was 57 million.
That's
That's the total, and not necessarily what's assigned to this.
No.
And then they use home funding, which is a federal funding source. That's an entitlement, and CDBG has a housing component for like rehab. So they use those are funds they deploy in support of that. And then they recently got the lead hazard abatement grant, where that's associated with housing specifically, because a lot of times if there's a rehab of, let's say, a low-income elderly resident, you need to do a roof and some weatherization to keep the structure going. If there's lead, there's a wall of federal requirements that come in that are sometimes unfunded mandates, and so this grant they've got is helping move that down.
I don't know where to bring this up, so I'll just bring this up here. And I fully understand that this is maybe out of the purview of the audit committee and what we do, but I think it's at least something that needs to be brought up. Given some of the things that have been going on at the federal level over the last 2.5 weeks, especially as it relates to grants and things like this, do we have in case of emergency, break glass plan in terms of if this goes away?
CDBG and home, that's we were just Commissioner Link asked the same thing in terms of the budget. I mean, because because the CDBG and the home funds come from the federal government.
Right.
And the fair balance.
Well, I think to your point, it's a great question, Mr. Lynn. And it's one that actually was discussed in a meeting with myself and others yesterday. But I think going forward, knowing that these actions are on the horizon and could happen at any point in time, management is going to be carefully looking at agenda items that involve grants and sort of thinking in the back of their mind. I don't know exactly whether that's in a report or something else, but of contingency basically that
Yeah.
if awarded these funds, but then the next day the funds disappear and we've already contracted, what do we do? And I think that's going to be a question that is asked going forward almost on any grant related
Mhm.
project. I think at the moment though, right now, you know, obviously whether it's ARPA or CDBG or anything else, what's been in the hopper is in the hopper now, and there's, I mean, quite honestly, I don't think there's enough contingency for the government to try and obviously recoup any of that if it were to all of a sudden go away.
And that makes it complete, like you're saying, the answer to some of this stuff, it's like, well, you know, what do we do here? Well, the only thing we can do is just walk away. There's nothing else to do.
But we we have received all the ARPA funds. They are back
that's correct.
yet.
Yeah.
And we have received this year's CDBG funds.
No,
Okay.
Well, and I guess the other question is, can any of this money be clawed back? Is that possible?
I mean, I think we're all still waiting on direction at the end of the day.
Exactly, that's the answer. We don't know.
Correct.
We'll see.
So, but I think ultimately to your point, you're right. It's applicable to this audit because this group obviously works in grants the most out of any of our departments. And so I think there will be guidelines eventually that either come from this department or are attributed to this department. I think at the moment though, those are still being discussed just because of the suddenness in which no one saw this coming necessarily until it was just one day you got an email. So I think now that it's on the horizon though, that everybody is actively planning for it.
You know, Captain Nash, okay.
That's the first.
There's a lot on there, but that's good. That's good. I think the public
Yes.
is not, there's gonna be a lot of discussion in our commission meeting. I know that. So I'll go ahead and move to item number E, FY 26 audit work plan preparation.
So, Rebecca, so do you want an action on the?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
No, no, I don't know if it was later or if it was.
Oh, no, sorry. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me back.
Plus, there's a lot of other bullet points under G.
Which means,
I mean,
Well-
it's just all this other stuff.
We'll just tackle the motion right now I think,
Okay.
first. And then,
Make a motion for the committee to approve the, if there's no changes recommended to the housing community development audit. To pass it on to the mayor.
Yeah.
So,
all in favor? Any opposed? All right, thank you.
So going down, still under the FY 25 audit work plan status, transit department real quickly, that is underway. Staff has basically completed the first phase of planning. We are in the fieldwork phase as of right now. And all signs, at least so far, point to following the established timeline and having that to you in the next couple of months. So we'll keep you posted as far as the transit audit is going. With regard to the tax assessor, I don't necessarily need a vote on this. This is just basically a follow-up memo that we intend to distribute to the mayor and commission. But wanted you all to be able to see it first, and if you have any comments or suggestions, we'll certainly take those into account before we send that on to the mayor and commission. But real quickly, based on the recommendations of the tax assessor's audit last year, we met with their staff in December to go over those recommendations, talk with them, and visited their site again to see some of those recommendations in place. And I would give the tax assessor's office plenty of credit. They took this audit very seriously, and a lot of their implementation took place almost immediately after the audit was complete. And they checked the box essentially on every one of the recommendations to the best of their ability. And I was happy to see, with it being our first audit, the seriousness and the fulfillment of a lot of the recommendations to ensure that the audit wasn't for nothing and actually got put into place. So,
Oh, this is the follow-up, review is not this, but another document.
well, that's the memo, Commissioner, and then the document right after it that you have on your file there, the split sheet there. Those are the
Oh, yeah, okay.
recommendations and the follow.
A lot of it.
You did.
Okay, great.
Any questions about the tax assessor's follow?
I the only thing that in here, I know we were going back to the follow-up, is there a line in this memo that says what you just said, that basically you did a great job in following up? Because if there's not, it would be good to, I was just reading through that, and it would be good to just put that there, because this will be an attachment that requires another click, and I'd like to
Yeah, I
give
think we
them
can
the
summarize.
credit for it, like little executive summary there that they were followed through in those areas would be helpful for efficient communication.
Yes, that's something that I think we can add before we send it to the mayor.
Yeah.
Commission.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving along here, I know we've got about 15-20 minutes left. Audit committee bylaws. So I want to first say thank you to Ms. Higgins for her patience with me back and forth on emails and different versions of this, and I appreciate her edits as well. And so I think about a week or two ago, I sent those edits directly from Beth to you all for your review. What we did in the interim is we took what we could of her suggestions, which I think were probably about 90%, and forwarded that onto the attorney's office for their review, given they fell bylaws. They made a couple edits, and then based on both sets, staff had only minor tweaks, and what you see in front of you paper copy wise today with the gray highlights and the strike throughs is what we suggest all of those changes in comprehension resulted. A few things that I just want to point out that were a little bit different from Ms. Higgins' version is based on some feedback from the attorney's office. For example, when it came to the appointment under section 1 of membership, basically page 1, if you will, because this is a committee that is directly appointed by the mayor and not the typical BAC process, we needed to strike through some of that information, basically at the attorney's request, and make it clear that there is no regularly established process. And I apologize, I'm in section 2 right now under terms of service. So that is on page 2 of the grade, where you see the strike through. That's the reason for that strike through there. Another one that I would like to point out is with regard to training. Beth did, Ms. Higgins did point out, there was no minimum hours, and that was something I was hoping to discuss with you all, but I essentially put 3 in there as a placeholder. And the language also was tweaked in a manner that we have to be cognizant of the fact that our committee is also made up of commissioners. The committee cannot force the 2 commissioners to undergo training per se. But, so the reason the shall was to should, and obviously encouraged every one of the members to undergo, minimum amount of training. But at the same time, if, for example, Commissioner Fisher, Commissioner Myers didn't live up to their training expectations, this board has no authority to make them. So, just yes. So,
There's no accountability method here.
well, I would hope being a small group that I will certainly encourage you all to do so. And I wanted to also leave flexibility in the fact that what I have found, even with some of our other boards, is there may be a conference, let's say, in town, where it's a 2-day conference, everyone attends, and you get 20 hours of continuing ed and you only need 3 for that year. But the next year you struggle to get even 1 or 2 based on your schedule. Well, you over exceeded the previous year, and is there a way to sort of keep in mind that, you know, you attended a 2-day conference, even if, and that education certainly carried forward into the next year, but to be able to say by ordinance that every member shall, without hesitation, complete a minimum number of hours when legally I can't enforce.
Right,
Yeah.
so just following through on that,
Yeah.
because we are in a second year here.
Mhm.
Like, do we have any resources you can help us with it?
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, because it would be good if, you know, annually, well, I guess, you know, just at the beginning of the year, something say, you know, here are some resources, because I'm not really sure. I need guidance I need a guidance counselor in my continuing auditing.
We can certainly provide that for you, and obviously we were waiting on some of these bylaws to be finalized, but yes, there are online options that we can make available for those that's easier. I will say that there is actually a conference going to be in Athens in fall, at the Classic Center that I think is very applicable to what we do, and that's something that I think we can look at from our budget standpoint.
What is the name of the conference?
So that is the Georgia Government Finance Officers Association, something that I am a member of, and that a lot of either finance / auditors throughout the state government, throughout the state and local government attend. It does have a good mix of not only just financial topics, but auditing as well. So. Yeah, but yes, we will certainly provide that for you. But I just wanted to go over some of those quick highlights, and you know, anyone from the board, including Ms. Higgins, has any questions about what was put in or ended up, you know, feel free to have a discussion.
And definitely when Kevin reached out to me, I said, I thought what we should, if we not so much table this, but our next meeting in March, maybe have a little more discussion about our bylaws since we had. So it was nice. I mentioned to him, it was okay with the group. It's something we could tackle in March, in our March meeting, about the bylaws to make sure you're okay with it. And dive into a little bit more detail if we choose to.
Right. And I appreciate you gave out all that material talking about audit committees in general. And I just think, you know, once a year, I think all boards and committees should have to look at their governance, what they're doing, what their mission is. Are they doing it? Is that what is expected? Is that what you want? And so I did do just a bit of research on in general what government audit committees do, but not just government audit committees, but nonprofits and corporate audit committees. And so that some of this is a compilation and extracted from some of that. But I was most interested in that association, the Government Finance Officers Association, in terms of their recommendations on audit committees. So it's really up to the government, you know, appointed and elected officials to decide how they want the audit committee to function and what they should look at. And I just think it's, you know, once a year, the committee should probably talk about that. And we have, as Gavin has told me a couple of times, we have a special relationship and organization based on the organization of our local government, and that the elected officials have been satisfied with what we have and how we do it. So I just think that as we get new members, or if we get new members, that it's good that they have their marching orders pretty clear in terms of what they should be doing, and how they should do it. And just soapbox.
And so these are the documents that came from
Yeah.
your,
Yes.
so we're gonna come back to
In
this.
March. Yes.
Yeah, we can. And so,
I'm not-
yeah.
Here's the top of that one.
The audit committee got
That,
that one, and
that's
then
one.
a single page.
Yeah,
And then a single page, okay, that's that one, but the other one with the grade, that's the one I printed out. Okay. Yes. Okay.
And so, I agree with Commissioner Fisher, you know, there's no rush on these bylaws, we can talk about this again. One thing I would say is we can have two distinct conversations though as well, although they are associated. The bylaws can be approved by this group when ready, and essentially enacted, and then if there's further discussion on the actual audit committee charter, those are technically two different documents, and we can approve one and then continue discussion on the other if needed. And just to highlight what Ms. Higgins has already, you know, sort of brought forth with regard to the charter is, in my talks, you know, with the mayor and looking with our attorney's office at some of the our audit committee charter, not to be confused with the Athens-Clarke County charter. This group is unique in that it is appointed directly by the mayor. There is no reference by ordinance to this group's existence. The audit committee does not exist in the Athens-Clarke County government charter per se. That said, you do have your own unique document, the audit committee charter, that outlines expectations essentially for this group. And to Ms. Higgins' point, those are things that we're good to annually take a look at and ensure that we're following. Although I agree that enhancements or, you know, edits to that document can certainly take place that, you know, further strengthen or detail what the audit committee does in overall overhaul, if you will, to the document in terms of its authority, purpose, and responsibility is not something at the moment anyway that the mayor is looking to entertain in my talks with him. Essentially, his charge to this committee was to continue the process, the progress that we're making within the realm of the existing charter, knowing that certain details can certainly change over time. But you know, as far as, you know, amending the Athens-Clarke County government charter to formalize the audit committee or go forth and give it more authority, I don't believe that at the moment there's enough to take.
Just to clarify, this Athens-Clarke County Audit Committee charter
Yes.
is not part of the Clark County job doc. Is this available online?
We
In
can
our-
make it online.
Well, I mean, is
Yeah.
it part of the things that I like when I go to the charter and the ordinances? This is not there.
That is-
So where is this a bit like where?
We can post it on our page. Again, we were wanting to make sure this discussion.
I just maybe we can
There's no
discuss this
direction
next time. Like
Yeah.
how this I don't need to discuss this, but how does it formally exist if it's not part of anything?
It's essentially an internal document that the audit committee, the original audit committee, as set forth by Mayor Davison
Yeah.
back when the audit committee first came to be.
Yeah.
It's okay.
You
Yeah.
can follow up, but I'll try. I'm just trying to tie the pieces together.
Sure.
That's
And your point, the mayor, actually, we've already had some discussion. We're gonna look at our charter this year.
okay.
So one thing that may be, and we have to get legislative approval, is to put that in our charter. If we want to do that, have a condition vote, but we are looking at the charter. The charter has not been looked at, from what I understand, in years. So that's what the mayor said he wants to explore, and wants to take a look at something.
But, excuse me, too, just like to publicly
Yeah.
thank Beth for.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
working
yes.
this on
Absolutely.
this. I can't speak for Carl, but I have my zone of interest and expertise, and this is not it. And so this is a passion for you, and you've done a wonderful job, so thank you for for digging through this, pulling this out, because it's very helpful and it's definitely needed, but it's a skill set that you have, and I appreciate you working with them to get that done. So.
And I appreciate Ms. Higgins' patience with me, and my explanations.
Thanks. That's really great.
All right. Chair, I think we're done with the FY 25, and if you'd like to move on to FY 26. Okay. So real quickly, again, we're winding down. To touch upon, we're not asking for any action, obviously, today. But we've made significant strides already now in the FY 26 audit work plan draft. And this was by design. This time last year, we were trying to avoid, obviously, a rush of the year's topics for audits. And so I think we're well ahead of the game to where we can talk about it today. We can even have some time in March to talk about it yet before we'll really be coming back to you, August or April or May. That's before it goes. But after talking with our partners, our stakeholders, including the mayor, management, our commissioners, as well as our take on different audit topics that we keep track of throughout the year, this is essentially the first draft of what has come about from that. Now, obviously, there is still work for you all. That's an audit committee to this, and we certainly welcome that. But we wanted to at least provide you the first course, if you will, of what some potential topics for next year would be, as well as their scoring. Keep in mind that the scoring is there for a reason, obviously. It's an objective-based risk assessment, but that is not the only criteria from which to rank and select audits. I mean, there is obviously a more subjective component to some of these, and certainly looking for your feedback as well. So don't feel as though the top 4 are just the way that it has to go. If you it's number 1 and then jump down to number 10 because you feel that that scoring isn't reflective of what is actually the reality, then we can certainly do that as well. So, but happy to entertain any questions you may have immediately with this, knowing that we would like for you to certainly study it, look at it, and before our next meeting and have more in-depth discussion about it.
I might have missed this one, I just I missed it, but I just want to make sure I understand how this works. This chart and this transportation public works at first, is that the recommended
No.
results? Okay, so over here then, are the initial preliminary results on this chart the initial ranking?
Yes, based on the score.
So based on this, now how can you left them in this order? So based on this one, the first one would be emergency management.
That's correct.
And then the second one would be local land development.
That's correct.
And the third one would be
A tie between ACC Gov organizational structuring and ACC Gov land inventory.
okay, so that the transportation public works on this matrix is ranked 5th, right?
That's correct.
And so the reason you have this final recommendation over here because there's not a final recommendation.
There is not.
Right.
No.
But this is the initial ranking.
Yes.
Ranking, so that would be there. Okay.
And we can certainly, once we get a better idea of where the audit committee is going, re-rank these obviously in a sequential order for ease. But at the moment, this is a fluid document that, based on a discussion today, I could hear from someone, well, the way you scored severity for TPW is incorrect and it needs to jump up. Well, that score automatically then changes its rank. And so don't put too much stock in just the way it's sequentially listed as much as the scoring on the far right-hand side at the moment. So,
and in the capital projects department, okay, really is that initial rank of 5. And basically that would include SPLOST and T-SPLOST, right?
to a point.
Yeah.
So what I would say is the suggestions as well as our recommendation are not necessarily to audit the SPLOST programs or the T-SPLOST programs. It is capital projects in terms of its existence as a department and its role in managing and operating those funds.
Because they're doing the program administration versus the company that's
Actually doing,
the project administration.
Correct.
So we have where that company used to be doing the program.
correct.
Right.
Yes.
So the SPLOST office that exists around the corner here only does the projects now where the capital pro is the big program. Okay.
Yes. And so that would be the audit for that particular one, is the new department that is overseeing the programs as opposed to looking at individual SLOSS programs, projects, I'm sorry. So,
Last year you gave us a sheet of updated status of all the government departments and which ones had audit done by the internal auditor's office and the ones that had
Yes.
also their external audits and investigations or whatever their governing thing was. So can we get an updated sheet now a year later on?
we can get you an updated one on the internal audits that are obviously done by our department. The one even across the board with all audits of the government has not been recently updated. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't satisfied with the way it was responded to the first one. And I don't know if there'd be very difference to report because a lot of our departments are not under the realm of the manager's office. They essentially don't have to respond positively. And I'm not saying they didn't, I'm just saying they can easily hit delete on the email if they wanted to. I don't think it's a priority per se. There's also, I don't think it paints an accurate picture, to be honest with you. From what I've seen in terms of a report from a department about what audits they undergo versus then when I dig deeper and see what about this one, this one, this one, and this one. I think it would give you inaccurate information to this body, assuming that there are 5 audits going on externally by one department, when in reality there may be 2 or there may be 10. I don't know, to be honest, and I'm only getting the information based on what they give me and their interpretation. Now, I'm not saying that's an excuse not to ever keep track of that or do that.
Well, the idea is to have government departments having an expectation of being in an audit environment.
Sure.
And so part of the risk is we kind of have 2 risks as I see it. There's one that we don't have an annual program that's covered by the internal auditor's office. The charter does say that the internal auditor's office, the Office of Operation Analysis, should keep ongoing for every department. That is in the charter, so that's a requirement. Doesn't say annually, doesn't say semi-annually,
Sure.
every 5 years. So when we're starting to work on the work plan, the idea of keeping all the departments in the idea that they can be audited, they will be audited, and they should be audited on a regular basis. But what we want to avoid is duplication. We don't want to put this encumbrance on them all the time. If the airport has an annual FAA inspection, great, we should know it, it's done. It's the transportation, they get their audit from, their, I think it's important to understand where the gaps are. True. That's first. And second, we don't have in any style other than the program that you worked on the board for a whistleblower program for government administration for fraud, waste, and abuse. We just don't have it. As far as I know, we don't have it. And normally 50%, about 50% of that kind of problem in government is found through whistleblower programs. Sure. And about 20% is captured, 30% by internal audit programs where your irregular internal controls, which you can catch it because you've got the controls in place, you see the abnormality that's happening in certain functions. So for the 20% or 30% that we're actually doing, you want to know where the gaps are.
No, and I don't disagree with you. And I think it's something that we will still continue to work on as a department, obviously, in approaching these departments and trying to get that accurate information. It's not, we're not abandoning that effort. I don't think it will be done in time for assessment of this particular program, but we will bring that up and we will continue to work with our departments on gathering that information. I think unfortunately, it's a difficult thing, not just from our perspective, but a department that has never operated in this manner. And I'm not excusing the fact that our government as a whole hasn't operated that way, where departments regularly submit their audits to the operational analysis. It just hasn't happened. And there's going to be a curve in terms of people remembering also to do that, and us keeping track of it. So we will continue to work on that, and I agree 100% that that is a good assessment of risk.
And when we come up with a work plan, identifying where those gaps are would really play, from my mind, play into the order of, and what we look at. I mean, that's what, remember last year when we said comprehensive audit and do periodic audits.
Oh, absolutely.
To be able to do more audits, just to create an audit environment, create that people that we haven't had a chance to look at. But you don't necessarily have to go and have a 6-month audit. You know, you can do an absolutely perfect job, every detail and everything. I think it's more important to be to have more coverage, to be able to identify. And of course, you guys have done a fabulous job this year. I think you've done a really good job of being able to go forward from scratch. And but I just think that concept, that idea, filling in the blanks where the holes are, just to not necessarily keep people on their toes and stuff like that, but every department, every department.
That's right. Yeah.
Sure. And like I said, I think we will continue to do that. We did look at that document, though. I will say the document that we produced last year is still valid in terms of it. It still outlines the ones that we do anticipate, because it had a timeline. So, for example, if you were looking at the tax assessor's office, it will clearly say that there is an annual audit of assessment. So, whether or not we've confirmed that this year doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. Like, and thing with, you know, anybody else who responded. HR responded that they undergo regular audits by the Department of Labor. That still is occurring. I may not have the most updated copy of it yet. We can work on that, but I still see value in that tool, in that spreadsheet, to be able to assess this year's work plan in looking at, okay, well, here's what they do get, and here's how often they get it. We may not have the updated copy of it at the moment, but we can use it in our duplication assessment of, are we anticipating them getting an audit done this year? So, but yes, I agree that we will continue as a department to work.
And have we received the quarterly? I don't know if the grand jury had gone back on their job of doing their quarterly analysis of receipts when we get there.
I actually keep up with those quarterly. I can actually, you know, submit those to you. I haven't seen anything, quite honestly, that was worthy of, you know, your attention at the moment, but I'm not going to hide it. You know, I'll gladly submit those to this. I actually underwent a grand jury myself for our department. So the auditor got audited last month. And I'd like to say we had a clean bill of health, at least about what was in the presentment. But
it's one of the few checks that we have on the finance department. So the finance department creates all its own documents and their own stuff. I think you probably have a pretty good one. They get pretty good results on the reports. Their budget work is good, but even though it's not professional audit that the grand jury does, at least the fact that they're doing it once a quarter, looking at the bank statements.
Why do we not have a whistleblower program?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, and again, what Ms. Higgins is pointing out is correct, and I'm not disputing that. Our program is not set up that way, nor do we have the authority to do that. By ordinance, there is nothing in the auditor's ordinance that says you shall have a whistleblower or investigate fraud.
And there was something on the committee that was put together to put together this committee.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did my research, I included the concept of a whistleblower as well. So maybe we could discuss it. It's not in here. Discuss it when we come back to discussing those other documents. Because wouldn't that be a place to just have more discussions since it's new right now?
I know we gotta go. Why is that not within our purview to establish?
Because it's not in this document.
Well, it's not even in the chart.
It's not in that, and that's what I
County
Correct.
Yeah.
And so,
and it's not in that. Yeah.
Why does it have to be?
so the department, the operational analysis department, and my job in particular operate under the guidelines that are established by ordinance. And so nowhere in the ordinance does it specifically say that we have the authority to investigate fraud as a department. Now, that's not to say that we can't participate in that. And I'll be honest, there isn't a formal whistleblower number, but if I receive calls, which I have, from outside entities citizens, whatever, that want to bring light and shed light to something, and again, this has occurred. We do take the time to look at those things. Now, as of right now, I have not necessarily come across something that is worthy of, well, not worthy,
Right.
but to the level of bringing it to your attention after our initial analysis. The other thing to keep in mind is that from a best practice standpoint too, the staff, including myself, don't currently possess a fraud examiner's certification or license, which is a separate thing from auditing. It is a specialty. A lot of those are actually outsourced to outside consultants, like a certified fraud examiner, consultant, or accountant to investigate, because there is a level above and beyond that is needed for that. The other aspect that comes with fraud is there is typically a legal component to fraud if you find it. Our office does not have subpoena power. Our office does not have investigative power in terms of law enforcement, which would be brought in to something like that if in fact there is evidence. But the actual investigation of fraud at this moment in time in our government would be done by the police.
So this is the thing, when you set up whistleblower programs, there's a lot of different ways. One of the problems I think with ACC is that we're a big, small organization, and we have, and I think from all that I've looked at government stuff for years and years, it's pretty well managed, pretty well run.
Yeah.
And but it also had a reluctance to do a lot of auditing stuff over the years, looking at what we do and how we do it. It's always been a little bit painful, a little bit difficult, and very political. And so whistleblower programs can be, as you say, you can have an outsourced whistleblower program that you hire a company, you make a phone number, anybody that knows anything that's going on, this is the phone number you call, it goes to, and it's completely outside and independent, so to speak, of the Internal Audit Office. Also being the point of contact for whistleblower programs kind of dangerous in a way, because the Internal Audit Office wants the government departments to work with them,
Right.
and they want to work with them to make their job better. It is operational analysis. It is effectiveness and efficiency and supporting them in their needs and understanding where their budget problems are, their staffing problems are, so that they can do assistance work, right? So that's the concept, the strong concept of internal auditor office are the compliance and the auditing part is the painful part for every organization. Getting ready for an audit is always difficult. You're going to have to look at this. So you're always going to have that little piece. If you add whistleblower program to internal audit, it's got more of a problem. So that's why sometimes they'll put it in the manager's office. Sometimes they'll have some organizations actually give it to an audit committee. These are independent audit committees that aren't based on independent audit committees. They also, and then they also have on the committee somebody that is expert in fraud, waste, and abuse, and being able to do. For example, we actually have a great accounting office right here at the training the master's, doctor's programs in accounting. And one of the areas that I always tried to get in to get that class was the accounting offices that do specifically what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They might be willing to serve on a audit committee, something like that. They could do that. But the third option is to have an external contract, like we do with our financial company that does. So that might answer your question why we don't do it. It's been something very sensitive on my mind for 20 years, ever since you were maybe even before you became that we were really strong on.
I know the meeting has got it, but I don't think that's something that's got to occur.
Well, we did it for the police. We did that's a kind of a whistleblower program. What you're working on with the police stop is kind of like that. And
Well,
how much work
But
it was
it's not
to find.
internal, it's not an internal situation.
Well, and again, what I would just say though is there is a difference between being a topic being brought to the attention of our office. I think quite honestly, and I haven't seen any issues with it. If somebody has a problem with the government, they have called us, trust me. And we have investigated, to a limited degree, whether or not to continue to pursue such a thing.
But
Sometimes
it's yourself, there's only so much you can do.
correct, but at the moment that there was a clear fraud that was occurring or the thought of fraud, I would then turn that over to our police department and bring it to the attention of management. I haven't had that instance occur yet. A lot of times what also can happen, unfortunately, with a whistleblower hotline and something to anticipate is it's just a complaint line. And it's not a valid fraud instance with evidence. It's just, I don't like the decision of the merit commission and you need to investigate that. There's nothing to invest. It's just a political decision. So that is also anticipated when you put a phone line together like that, in terms of workload. But I'm not disagreeing that in some form or fashion, this government could certainly benefit from something like that, but I think it needs to be carefully thought out. It needs to be structured in a way, like Beth said, that is or is not inclusive of our office. It may not live with us, it may live somewhere else. And it needs to be staffed in a way that allows investigation. Because even with Peace Corps, for example, Peace Corps is a review body. They do not investigate, nor do they have the authority to investigate actual police complaints. They review investigations that have already been. So that is just something that, yes, I mean, continued discussion can always occur on that, but at the end of the day, in order for that to happen, that is a political decision that will have to be embodied.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you.
Yeah.
Said, I'm sure it's said it where it does just turn. Sure, but, I certainly didn't know the number, but I mean, that's always been my understanding. That ability to pick up a phone and call somebody anonymously, because you know the hesitation goes back to grade school in terms of wanting to turn to something that's going on that's wrong. But we're not talking about grade schools. Okay. These are millions of dollars we're talking about on top of dramatic things that lead to people's injury or death if it's bad enough for them. In an organization such as the government. So on that lovely note.
That's all I got.
You do internal update.
I'll also say really quickly to get you all out of here is Vol met Libby Desai, who is our new full-time management analyst. That was a position that was granted by the Mayor Commission as part of this current year's budget. Libby comes to us from UGA with a degree in statistics, so she will be very good with our data analysis as well. So we're glad to have her on board. And with the new year, certainly things are kicking off, as you've seen just here in this agenda alone, length of meeting, but also eventually with the other side in public safety. So all that said, we'll get some information out to you for next meeting and have some good discussion.
All right. Our next meeting date will be March 6th, at 10:30. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, all in favor, yes.
Aye. Very good. You call.